In the previous lecture, we were talking about how we can use the words private instead of public everywhere, and how each different word will impact on your project. Just by means of demonstration, I've copied across the code from our objects class, and I'm going to create a new method in the car class. And all we're going to do in this class is to actually demonstrate how each different option, public, private, protected, and even unassigned, is visible within the project. So as we can see, if we try to access this test method now, we can do something like car.test. And you can see within the autocomplete while we were typing this, in fact, down here, test is accessible. If we were to change this to private, we would essentially be saying that this method should only be accessible within these two curly braces. And so if we do test now, we're going to get an error message. In fact, if we do autocomplete, it's not going to give us any options at all. The test has actually disappeared from down here. If we did protected, again, test is going to be accessible to us, because that's what protected does, as we discussed in our lecture. And again, if we just don't leave anything there at all, test is going to be accessible to us again, but this time it's going to have different properties. The next thing that we talked about was the return properties. As you can see, we've got void here. Now, as we mentioned earlier, we could change this to anything else, any other data type. But all that means that we would have to make sure that we're returning the actual data type that we intend to return. So in this case, we're returning an int, which means that we've got to return an int. If we change this to return string, we've got to make sure that we're returning a string. And the same is true of every other data type that we might want to use. The final thing that we discussed was overloading. So I'm just going to put this back to public. So imagine we wanted to pass a property across to this instead of just returning the word string. Let's return the word message, or let's return a message. So we're going to pass something into this method, and then it's immediately just going to return it back to us. In order to do this, we obviously need to pass something across. And this is just going to return this message to us. I'm just going to put this into a print line so that we can see the output. But what if we didn't want to pass our message across every time? What if we wanted to have a default message? Well, we can do that by basically creating a duplicate of this method. And this duplicate is basically just going to call this second version of the function and pass a message across. So to do that, we're just going to return this function and call it at the same time. But we're going to type across. So what happens now is we have this option to call this message. In fact, let's change this to something else. If we call this now, we're going to get the message something else back. However, if we didn't put anything in here at all and just left it blank, we're just going to call the first version of that function, which is then going to pass in message to our second version of the function. This is obviously very useful if we want to set defaults for different variables, but as I mentioned in the lecture, The only thing to try and remember is that you shouldn't create multiple instances of the code within the actual methods. You should just call the method multiple different times, so that you've only actually got one true version of how the method should be performed. The only thing that's obviously changing is what data you're passing across to it.